The unique nature of the reserve simply stunned me. Why had I never been here before? Spellbound, I walked aimlessly, gazing around. The perfection of the surrounding nature could not be adequately expressed in any words, so my head was filled with a kind of rapturous emptiness. Soon the warden appeared before me again. The stern expression on his face softened somewhat, and with a gesture he invited me to follow him. We climbed to the top of a green hill, and a breathtaking valley view opened before us. There was a settlement, toy-like houses drowned in greenery and flowers, like an illustration from a fairy tale. One could have looked at this whole picture with tenderness if it did not seem somewhat unreal. I had the suspicion that such a thing could exist only in a dream. I glanced questioningly at the warden, but he only smirked into his beard as if to say, "You haven't seen anything yet." We descended into the valley when I began to realize that I didn't remember how I ended up in the reserve. I wanted to get at least some explanation from the old man. It seems I awkwardly remarked that those lucky ones who can afford to live among such beauty must feel pretty good, to which he irritably replied, "And who is stopping you from being among them?" I started the worn-out record about how not everyone is born into wealth, and no one can control their fate. The warden ignored my words and said, "That's just it. Every person is free to choose any fate for themselves. The only freedom we truly possess is the freedom of choice. Everyone can choose whatever they want." Such a statement didn't fit into my understanding of life, and I began to object, but the warden didn't even want to listen. "Fool, you have the right to choose, but you don't use it. You simply don't understand what it means to choose." "Nonsense," I persisted. "How can I choose whatever I want? As if everything in this world were allowed." And suddenly I realized that this was only a dream. Puzzled, I didn't know how to behave in such a strange situation. As far as I remember, I hinted to the old man that in a dream, as in reality, he was free to spout any nonsense he wished, and that this was the entirety of his freedom. But it seemed this remark didn't bother the warden at all. He only laughed in response. Realizing the absurdity of the situation, why did I even get into a discussion with a character from my own dream? I began to wonder whether it might be better to just wake up. The old man seemed to read my thoughts. "But enough. We don't have much time," he said. "I didn't expect they would send me such a fool as you, and yet I must fulfill my mission." I began questioning him about what this mission was and who they were. He ignored my questions and instead asked his own, what then seemed like a ridiculous riddle. Every person can gain the freedom to choose whatever they want. Here is the riddle. How can one obtain this freedom? If you guess, your apples will fall into the sky. No matter how you twist and turn, you cannot escape fate. On the one hand, such an interpretation oppresses with its hopelessness. It turns out that if a person is dealt a fate of not the highest order, then no hope for improvement lies ahead. But on the other hand, there are always people who are quite content with such a state of affairs. After all, it is convenient and reliable when the future is more or less predictable and does not frighten with its uncertainty, and yet the fatal inevitability of destiny in this sense provokes a feeling of dissatisfaction and inner protest. A person deprived of luck laments their fate. Why is life so unfair? One has everything in abundance, while another constantly lives in need. To one, everything comes easily, while another spins like a squirrel in a wheel, and all in vain. One is endowed by nature with beauty, intelligence, and strength, while another, for some incomprehensible sins, must carry the label of second-rate for their entire life. Why such inequality? Why does life, limitless in its diversity, impose restrictions on certain groups of people? What have the less fortunate done to deserve this? A deprived person feels resentment, if not indignation, and tries to find some explanation for this state of affairs. And then various doctrines appear. For example, karma, the idea of punishment for sins in past lives. as if God Almighty has nothing better to do than raise his wayward children. But even with all his omnipotence, he seems to struggle with this very process of upbringing. Instead of punishing for sins during one's lifetime, God for some reason postpones retribution until later. But what sense is there in punishing someone for what they do not even remember? There is another version, more comforting, that the needy and suffering now will receive generous compensation, but again, either somewhere in heaven or in some future life. One way or another, such explanations cannot bring full satisfaction. Whether these past and future lives exist or not is practically irrelevant, because a person remembers and is aware of only one, this very life. And in this sense, it is their only one. If one believes in the predetermination of fate, then the best remedy for despair is resignation. New explanations appear again. If you want to be happy, then be happy. Remain optimistic and be content with what you have. People are made to understand that they are unhappy because they are eternally dissatisfied and want too much, while contentment should be a rule in itself. One should rejoice in life. A person seems to agree, but at the same time feels awkward about meeting dull reality with joy. Surely they have the right to want something more. Why force oneself to rejoice? It is the same as forcing oneself to love.